Hey, okay, so I realize I've done so many base videos recently, but I feel like it changes ever so slightly. And then people see it and they're like, what are you doing differently? Like, share the wisdom. So I'm gonna do that again. So I'm gonna kind of like go through some parts of it a little bit quick or skip over them because I've done so many base videos recently, but I have perfected these like little bits that I'm going to, like, whatever. There's just little techniques that I'm like including right now that have like totally changed my base and I love it. So the first thing is hydration, obviously. My biggest like makeup influences have been Makeup by Mario, obviously, Patrick Ta, Hung Van Gogh, and I've been like kind of binge watching a lot of their videos on YouTube. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, my skin's like fairly moisturized, but I'm gonna go in a little bit more and really focus on my under eye area with the Tatcha Dewy Skin Cream. I'm just gonna take like that much and focus on my fingertips. And I'm gonna especially hydrate under my eyes and then kind of take what's left over and work it to the rest of my face. And I try not to put like too much on my eyelids and my brows, but like don't neglect those areas, you know? And I'm gonna kind of let like what's underneath my eyes really, really sit, but I really wanna work in everything else. Now, one of the keys to this is to allow it to sink in. So do not just like moisturize your face and then immediately go in with everything else. Okay, so now that I've let that sink in a little bit, I'm gonna prep underneath my eyes using a eyeshadow primer. And if you are confused, I will link the video somewhere up here or like down below or whatever. But this is one of the things that I'm gonna go through quickly. So I'm using my Anastasia eyeshadow primer, and this is to prep for concealer. Believe it or not, this is not a concealer. It's really funny, my boyfriend is playing Call of Duty right now and he's trying to be so quiet. I can hear him whispering. Okay, now I'm gonna do a little bit of color correcting under my eyes with my Bobbi Brown color corrector in Peach. I just realized I forgot to put on sunscreen. I always apply sunscreen. So just so you know, like, I mean, I'm going outside, but just so you know, I always apply sunscreen after my moisturizer, and it's the Elta MD sunscreen. So if you're going outside, please make sure that you're wearing sunscreen. I just completely forgot. I've already filmed like 6 videos before this, and my mind's everywhere. Anyway, so now what I'm gonna do is apply my foundation before concealer, and I am going to be using the Rare Beauty foundation, which has been my favorite foundation, and it's definitely a key piece in this look. It's very, like, it has really nice coverage, but it's not too, doesn't have too much coverage. It's very dewy, but not too dewy. It's like the perfect formula, in my opinion. I'm using the shade 170W. Just draw a little bit on like the major parts of my face, especially in the areas in the center of my face where I need coverage, just like that. And then I'm gonna go in with my Ofra sponge, which needs rehydrating. I'm just gonna lightly mist it with my Dominique Cosmetics JD Weighty 180 setting mist, or skincare mist, or whatever it's called. And then start working this into the skin. And I think one of the most important things about foundation, and particularly like the way that I've been loving my base recently, is really just very light coverage, creating kind of like a cohesive color throughout. And then if I need to spot conceal, I can go in and do that later with concealer. But I've really been loving a very natural skin look. I want it to feel like I'm not wearing a ton of makeup. Okay, now he's yelling, which is like so rude. You can obviously use a brush or a sponge. Sponges are my favorite. I feel like they're quick. They press the product into my skin. It's sort of like added hydration as well. I just get a more, I don't know how people apply foundation with a brush and not get like brush strokes on their face. For whatever reason, I am like incapable of doing that. In this area where I need a little tiny bit more coverage, I'm just going to apply a tiny bit more of that foundation. It's basically the only place that I want it. And then for concealer, I'm using the Rare Beauty Serum Concealer in the shade 170W. So their concealer and foundations are meant to go together. Like the concealer shade is like maybe a shade lighter. I think you can see it there than the foundation. So it's meant to be like, you know, the center of your face kind of thing, like concealing and highlighting. So I'm gonna do a tiny bit there, here, my chin, tops of my cheekbones, and then like that. And then I'm gonna blend that out with my Elsie Cosmetics Velvet Sponge, which has been sold out everywhere. I don't know what to tell you guys. I'm really stressed out about it. Luckily I have a backup, but I need it to come back into stock. I don't usually spritz my sponges. I'm just rehydrating them because I cleaned them earlier because they shut off our water today. So I'm just like rehydrating it. You can use a setting mist. It's no like big thing, I guess. Anyway, so I'm focusing these in the areas where I want to brighten up a little bit and conceal. Very small amounts. You know, I want light layers. Okay, now one of the reasons that I'm going through these steps fairly quickly is because not only are they the same as the other base videos that I have done, but the real like technique comes when I start applying powders. But I just felt like I needed to show you, you know, the steps before in case you haven't seen them. And if you're like just confused by them, I'll link my like most recent base video and then like the videos that like pertain to these tips and tricks, you know? Okay, I'm gonna quickly do my contouring and my brows off camera because it doesn't really matter. Do whatever you want. Once again, base videos down below. Okay, so basically, I just did my contouring the same way that I typically do, and the reason that I didn't show it to you is because what really matters now is after you apply all of your creams, how you apply your powder. So I typically go in with like a second layer of concealer before I set my under eyes, and that's where I start, is setting my under eyes. So I'm just going to apply just a teeny little dot right there in like just underneath the hollows of my eyes. And to set my under eyes, I'm using the Elsie Cosmetics Light Medium Translucent Powder, which is what I always use. And I'm gonna be using a small amount. So I always tap the product off into the cap, pick it up, tap it off, pick it up, so that I'm getting like a nice even distribution. Blend this out. When I apply the powder, I'm gonna focus it directly under my eyes. To here, but I'm leaving that cheekbone. So just making sure that this area is set so that it doesn't crease or move. And then I'm going to bring that a little bit onto the side of my nose because I like to brighten up that area. Pick up a little bit more powder and then just here around my nose where I get oily. And I'm gonna lightly do this. I'm not patting. I'm sort of buffing it into the skin. Again, this is an area that I like to brighten, and I can tend to get oily. So just like that, patting underneath my eyes because that's where I need the most coverage. That's the area that I need to set the most. And then slowly just kind of like buffing in this area. And if you look closely, you can see it doesn't look like I put a ton of powder in this area. I'm really just kind of like mixing that powder in with the foundation, which is creating, this is gonna sound gross, but it's creating like a tiny bit more of a paste rather than applying like a ton of powder on top of it. Okay, let's do the rest of it. So I started doing my powder application like this after watching people like Patrick Ta and Hung Van Gogh apply powder to models. You always see them hold their brushes like pretty far back as if they're buffing the powder into the foundation. And I used to think like, isn't that just going to remove coverage? But it's about where you apply it. Keeping it nice and tight over here. Picking up a tiny bit more. Bringing it along the side of my nose. Around my nose. Buffing into my smile line. And you want to make sure that you're holding your brush far back so that you're not, all of your focus isn't at the front of the brush and you're not doing this. That's how you're going to remove coverage. If you're holding your brush far back and kind of just buffing like this, you're applying a nice light amount. It makes for much better blending. I'm going to do the same thing up here because I can tend to get a little bit oily in my forehead. So rather than, but I don't want to get rid of that shine. That's the thing, is that like the reason that I started doing this technique is because I felt like I was removing so much of the glow of my skin. Like I would put down this beautiful foundation, I had this stunning glow, but then I would go in and set with a powder and I would lose all of that. So I'm just going to really lightly buff. And I'm focusing on like this area right here because between my, for whatever reason, between my eyebrows, just above my eyebrows, I can get like very oily in that area. So you can see how we're just kind of like changing the formula a little bit. We're not really mattifying. We're really just setting. And I'm taking that, the reason that I'm using this light powder is because I like this area to be light. And then I'm just gonna slowly buff that up to like where I have my worry lines, just because I like this area to be a little bit more set and I like to brighten the center of my forehead. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with a smaller amount of powder just under my chin, just right here. A little bit, once again, just to brighten a tiny bit, and that area can get oily. The reason that I was setting my whole face with the powder before was because I have been preferring the way my skin looks with a powder bronzer. It's actually a foundation, but with a powder bronzer rather than using a cream, because I used to use my KKW Beauty contour stick in medium, but recently I've been feeling like it makes my skin look too oily. What I started doing was bronzing with, where is it? My Bare Minerals Golden Beige 13 powder foundation, which is just like a really beautiful golden color, and I just think it's really flattering for my skin tone. And I guess for whatever reason, I felt like I had to set my face with powder to go in with this powder, or else I was going to like remove coverage, or it was gonna look streaky or something. So I decided to change the brush that I was using, which is the Morphe M510. So this is kind of like a highlighting brush. That's what I would compare it to. It's a very fluffy highlighting brush, and this is what I've been using to bronze. So I'm gonna pick up what's in the cap of the Bare Minerals foundation, and I swirl it and then tap it off, swirl, pick it up, tap it off. Same thing that I do with my under eye powder. And then rather than just setting this area, I'm literally just gonna start lightly buffing this into that foundation. So I'm not using any powder. And what I like about this is it mixes with the foundation like really beautifully. It doesn't pull, it doesn't leave streaks. This brush is very, very light and gentle. It blends so easily. The size allows you to have so much more precision. I always advocate for using much smaller brushes if you feel like you're not, getting the results that you want. And by applying the powder over the foundation, you're sort of like setting this area without having to go in with a setting powder. Now, if you're using a much denser brush, it's probably going to remove coverage. And you should be aware of the fact that if you do have a lot of breakouts in a specific area of your face, and then you're, going over with a brush like this and buffing, there's always the possibility that you're going to remove some coverage. So it would be a good idea to just set those areas with a little bit of translucent powder, or to spot conceal with a color that will match perfectly after you bronze. So we applied just that powder over the foundation, and I just have like the most beautiful glow in that area. But if we're up close, you don't see that powder. My skin looks like my skin. It still has that beautiful glow, So then I've been doing the same thing with my cheekbones. So I like to start where I contoured, like right in here, and then buff it up and out. And again, holding my brush back far enough so that I'm not like putting tons of pressure on it. using circular motions and just following the shape of my cheek up to my temples a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm blending everything. Another thing that I really like about this technique is that it leaves my skin sort of like prepared for either a cream blush or a powder blush, you know? And same with the highlight. I don't feel like I have to wear a powder highlight. I can definitely still go in with creams over this because I'm kind of not like setting the liquids. I'm kind of mixing it with the powder. So I'm gonna apply the Ciate Halo Blush, Marbled Light Halo Blush, just like a nice neutral blush. And I'm using the Morphe M405. So I'm picking that up, tapping it off. I always do the same thing for all of them. And then kind of the same thing, holding it far back. And rather than like buffing with this brush, I'm just going to pat. And I like to, you guys know, I like to start up on my cheekbones. Create a glow here and then slowly blend it out. And I guess you could do this. Actually, I feel like blush would probably work really nicely with that bronzer brush that I was using. That's actually a highlight brush. See how seamless everything looks though? And if you feel like, oh, I definitely can't do that, like I'm just gonna get skipping or it's gonna look patchy, consider how you're holding your brush. It really has so much to do with how you apply the product. Wish I didn't have this irritated little patch underneath my eye, but that's fine. Okay, should I apply highlight? Probably. Okay, for highlight, I'm just gonna go in with my Becca Moonstone. OG, you know what I mean? This guy, I haven't used it in a while. And for highlight, I'm using a Wayne Goss brush. I don't know what it's called, but it's like it looks like this. And I love to just like load it up and then sweep it gently. But you'll notice I'm always, every single brush that I'm applying my face product with, I'm holding it at the end. And then another thing that I love about this technique is that there's really no need for a setting spray, because a lot of the time you're using a setting spray to kind of like bring the life back into your skin after applying all of these powders, but there's really no need. Unless you have very dry skin and you really need to bring some life back, or you just need extra hydration. A little bit right there. I really like doing the center of my forehead, like right here. Pull a little sweat back on my brow bone. Course. Just a teeny little bit on the tip of my nose. Just above the tip of my nose to give it a little bit more of a lift. And I'm gonna do my inner corners because how could I not? Okay, so I just finished off my brows and popped on a little bit of lip liner, and it's not even gloss, it's Aquaphor Healing Ointment. So this is my favorite new base. I feel like I've perfected it. Yeah, it's just very natural and I don't feel like I'm wearing a ton of makeup, but my skin looks like flawless and glowy, you know? My advice to you would be if you feel like you can't get away with this, or you can't get away with setting your face with powder, or you try to do this and you end up with like a lot of creasing, like you have to set your face with powder or else you crease throughout the day. Make sure that you're using small amounts of product. You do not need to go in with a ton of coverage. And I understand feeling like you need it if you have lots of breakouts. But the best thing to do, and one of the best things that I've learned from Lisa Eldridge, is if you apply a nice natural amount of coverage everywhere, but you have say you have one section of your face where you just need much more coverage. Say I just have a ton of breakouts over here. If you focus the coverage in that area and keep everything else very, very natural, you can get away with it. It looks a lot more convincing that your skin is flawless if you don't have a ton of coverage and a ton of powder and it's all caked on everywhere. Remember that you can kind of like pick and choose. So I did a little bit more coverage over here. This doesn't really bother me. I don't mind that these kind of show through. In fact, it sort of enhances the very natural look of my skin. But if I have particularly bad breakouts in places, I would just spot conceal with something a little bit more full coverage, cover that with a powder so that it doesn't move, and treat everything else the way that I did here. Okay, so that's my base. You guys have been asking. I did a live video recently and you were like, what are you wearing on your face? And this is it. So not hugely different from my other base videos, but a couple little tips and tricks to maintain the glow. All right, hope you enjoyed. See you next time.